So just as Lydia had mentioned, this session is being recorded. So if you do not want to be on the recording, do not go on camera, and you can type your questions into the chat. However, you know, this is, you know, basically this is a study group. So it's not a training. I'm not here to tell you information, etc. So this is more an interactive. Mel and I are here to support. So we are going to go through some of the content that this session covers, as well as the upcoming sessions. And then we do have some practice quiz questions that we will go through together. And hopefully that will elicit some discussions. And of course, feel free to ask your questions, however much. We are here for you. And I do see Anita on, and I see several other folks. So perhaps maybe just before we start, how about everyone can put raise up their hand if they're here in attendance to because they're going to be writing the RQAP, or because they're potentially interested in writing the RQAP for GLP. So if you can raise your hand, there should be a little hand raise button somewhere. All right, so we got it. All right, excellent. So we have quite a number of you. That's fantastic. All right, so welcome, and we hope that this will be helpful and useful for you. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into it. And again, feel free, if this is not a presentation in terms of me speaking and you all wait till the end, it is very interactive. The more questions you ask and the more you put into this working group, the more you will actually get out of it. All right, so today's meeting, of course, is the first session. And then we do have currently 5 additional sessions scheduled every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. And the topics are listed as below. So the topics do come from, if I can find my document. So if you are currently registered to write the RQAP exam, or registering shortly, this is one of the documents that you will find on the SQA website, and it will walk you through pertinent information that you need to know for writing the exam. So there's a whole bunch of content. I won't go through all of this with you, though if you do have questions, feel free to ask. But if we jump down to the GLP section, ignore the yellow highlights. That's just me making sure as I've been preparing the presentations. So we have the different assessments. So all of these sections are being covered in the 6 study groups. So we have the compliance assessment, there's monitoring, inspecting, and auditing. The compliance management, and that's what we're covering today. So the scheduling, the reporting, record keeping, and documenting. And then there's the applied expertise. So essentially today is about the only session that we will be covering a lot of material, but a lot of this is primarily focused on the role of QA and basically everything you need to know as QA. So of course, hopefully you're all well knowledged in the role of QA. So today, again, it's compliance management. We've got the scheduling and what to schedule, reporting, record keeping and what to report, and finally documenting what to document. So again, this isn't training.
Jumping in, Sherry.
Yes, please do.
Can you then go back to the schedule? I just
Absolutely.
have a question for everyone.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Here, yes. The one which is scheduled on Tuesday, March the 19th, conflicts with the FDA workshop on advancing novel designs in studies. It's more for clinical, but some of you may be involved both in GLP and GCP. So if many of you are planning to attend this workshop, that's free of charge, it's Tuesday, Wednesday, we may think about rescheduling that session, just to give everybody the opportunity and not to miss anything. So now if you can lower your hand and again raise if you are if you have registered for the session with the FDA for this 2-day workshop, just to know if we have many potential conflicts, or or nobody?
So yeah, if you're registered or planning on attending that workshop, Camilla, can you advise what the title of the workshop is? People may be registered and just not realize the dates.
Yeah, give me a second. I think
Yeah.
it's advancing novel designs. Just let me give you the exact quotation. Enhancing adoption of innovative clinical trial approaches, not designs, approaches.
Yeah. So if you're planning on attending that workshop, if you could raise your hand just so we could get a sense of if there's a lot of people planning. I did take a look at the agenda, and our time slot for that of the 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern, it is actually during the lunch break. But of course, if you're spending all day in a workshop, you may not be able to continue on in a lunch setting and do your studying. So some of you may have actual jobs. So
the question about the date, it's March the 19th. The workshop is on the 19th and 20th. It's 2 days. The second day is shorter, but still it's quite intensive.
Is this workshop, sorry, I came in a little late. Is this workshop a part of the study sessions or is it something additional?
No. It's a potential conflict. This is FDA and Duke Margolis Institute workshop in March. And we are just asking if many people have registered for that one, then we may think about rescheduling one of the study group dates. That's the whole purpose.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
But since we have purely GLP people and clinical trial approaches are not of interest. It might be just me registered for that one. But it's good to be sure.
Absolutely. Okay. So if you do look into it and say, oh, yes, this is something important I need to do, then please do let us know, because we can certainly adapt to the time frame. Again, these sessions are for you. They're not they're not for me to just spend my time talking. It really is to support you all and help you prepare for the upcoming RQAP exam, or to assess whether this is something you want to do, etc. So, all right. Thank you for pointing that out, Camilla. All right. So again, this is what we're going to cover today. So I do have a few slides with the different topics. So I will go through them in terms of, just highlighting what all the different topics we're covering today. And if you do have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or type it into the chat, and then we can certainly answer your questions. And if there's nothing in particular, we'll go ahead, dive into those 5 practice quiz examples, and then that will hopefully give you some ideas of what the exam is going to look like, what type of questions you'll have, and then we can of course have discussions about the actual answer. All right, so scheduling and what to schedule. So we have protocol audits, your critical phase study inspections, fraud data and supporting documentation audits, draft, interim, and or final report audits, release of the quality assurance statement for inclusion in the final report. Additionally, facility and support areas inspections, follow-up for issue resolution, maintain a copy of the master schedule and its updates, GLP training of personnel involved in the GLP process. Example, the quality assurance unit, study personnel, archivist, study director, test facility management, and manage, facilitate site visits, inspections, and audit activities of sponsors and regulatory officials. From the reporting, record keeping, and what to report, record.
This meeting is being recorded.
So GLP compliance status of studies, facilities, systems, and processes, scheduled and ad hoc inspections, audits, and findings. Sorry, I'm bobbing a lot just to make sure I don't miss any hands up or questions in the chat. Anita and Camilla.
Yeah, we can tell you. Mhm.
Thank you. I got lots of screens and lots of things popping up.
Yeah,
All
maybe
right.
everybody who is not talking go on mute just to make sure we don't have any background noise and the recording is also good quality.
Quality assurance unit copies of study protocols and protocol amendments, protocol and SOP deviations, quality assurance unit reports to management, study director, and other key individuals such as principal investigator, sponsor, client representative, etc. Continuing with, and then continuing, sorry, that should be number 6, quality assurance SOPs, copies of current and previous historical versions of facility and quality assurance unit SOPs and records of review of facility and quality assurance unit SOPs, master schedule, inventory of quality assurance unit study materials for archival retention. Sorry, it's a lot of words. My screen's a little bit small. Access and removal, replacement, disposition materials from archives, report any findings impacting study integrity immediately to the study director and management, and keeping records of the notifications. And the last core section of this overall training session or study session, sorry. I'm involved in training, so everything's always referenced to training. Inspection and audit results and response review, schedules to ensure the timely performance of required activities, status of recommended corrective actions based on facility and or study audits, quality assurance unit statements for study reports, quality assurance unit SOPs continued, training qualification of quality assurance unit personnel, records of regulatory and sponsor client inspection activities, findings in quality assurance unit and management responses, and records of other activities performed by the quality assurance unit. All right, so that's everything in a huge nutshell. So there's a lot of redundancies and stuff like that. So again, if you have any questions on any of those topics, feel free to chime in. I don't currently see anything in the chat or any hands up. So I think what will probably be easiest is to just jump right into the first question. However, what I do want to let you know, so actually, before we do that quickly, I don't know that I actually introduced myself, so I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I should have started with that. Again, this is my first session, so I'm learning. By the 6th week, we will be perfect at this. So my name is Sherry Lee Dawson, and I work at Charles River Laboratories, and I'm the Director of QA Training and Development. I am RQAP-GLP. It's certified, right? It's a certification or a recognition. I should know this. But I have my RQA-GLP. I've had it. I initially wrote it back in 2001, and I had it for my 3 years. And then I rewrote again in 2005 because I lost it because I didn't attend very much training back then, and I wasn't available to attend many of the conferences and stuff like that. So I rewrote in 2005 and have been an RQAP-GLP recognized professional since 2005. I've been a part of the RQAP group, the committee of CPR. Everything's acronyms, and I apologize not remembering all the terms, but from the CPR group that oversees the RQAP program, and I'm currently in a part of the SQA board, the GLP specialty section, etc. So I've been around for a while. And with that, I will pass the floor over to Camilla and Anita to introduce themselves a little bit to give you some of their background. So just so you know that you're in great hands.
Sure. Anita, do you want to go first? Okay, you leave it to me. Should I say like I am a GLP imposter at the beginning? Because I feel a little bit like that. I've been working in a lab, but that's very long time ago, and today's labs are completely different. But we have some interesting echo. Somebody has a loop. somewhere, probably joining from a computer and a phone. So choose one or the other. But I'm doing a lot of audits of both GLP labs and GCLP labs and analytical labs that provide some special analytical services. So I know how a GLP facility should look like, what should be in place, because I've been auditing quite a good number of them. And I've noticed quite a good number of times things that we consider maybe like everybody knows that. And then you see there is a deficiency. There is something which skips the attention or maybe is taken for granted and a training is not done properly. So things, for me, the GLP world is very important. If you think about it from the point of view, like the results that you generate are going to be used for decisions for first-in-man studies, for further clinical trials, and for the development of new therapies. That's one part of GLP work. The other part would be like stability, toxicity, any other kind of analysis that might not be directly associated with medicinal product development or clinical trials. But still, the outcomes are important for business decisions, for continuing, discontinuing programs, and all steps on the quality job you do, qualification of the people involved, good documentation, because if it's documented, it's a nice story to hear, but that's about it. It has very little value. And considering documentation, consider, do you have electronic records? Do you have paper records? Do you have hybrid records? And each of them might need slightly different approach to make sure that it's retained for the required period of time. Again, if it's not, and the information is lost, then the sponsor may maybe sue you, saying you ruined my my study or my program or whatever I based my decisions on. So reputation, good client portfolio, and being proud of what you do and the results, it should be the driving force, not really like we need to comply with the regulations. Even if there are no regulations, doing a good job is something that that should be the driving force itself, not just we need to comply. So that's my 5 cents.
So I guess it's my turn now. I wasn't actually supposed to be on. I was just on to learn from Camilla and Hector, but I guess Hector is not here. So I'll do I was trying to learn, but I'm going to be here helping you however way that I can. My name is Anita Habibi. I've been registered RQAP GLP since 2011. And I have worked as a GLP QA and veterinary GCP QA since 2008 in a CRO setting, in a sponsor setting, in a consulting setting. So I hope I can help in some ways, but I would definitely try my best. That's it.
Great, thank you, Anita, and sorry for putting you on the spot. It was more just to introduce yourself, and don't worry, you're not being thrown into this. So Anita, what's the response? All right, so we are going to jump into the quiz questions, and now one of the most important things that I learned the first time I wrote the RQAP exam for GLP was, when you're looking at the quiz questions, always take the strictest sense of what the regulations state. As we all know, that there's some areas that are very gray, and each company may have a subtle difference as to what you do, which is not necessarily not compliant, but again, you always think the most conservative, strictest interpretation of the regulations. If you go with that, you will do well. But yeah, it's something that when I was studying the first time for the exam, I'd be asking questions. I'm like, how come we don't do this? How come we don't do that in meetings? And I was told by my supervisor way back then and said, for those of you who are studying for the exam, take what the regulations say for when writing the exam. However, there's many gray areas, so there's different approaches. What we do may not be 100% as strict a sense of the regulations, but when you're writing the exam, you take it as that. Okay.
And I would just add, use common sense and simple logic, because I took the practice exam myself without reading the regulations, just with the basic knowledge of GLP and without all the FDA specifications and all that. And I passed it 100%, really based on common sense. What seems to me the most logical, the most correct answer? What would be the analog maybe with GCP? What I would expect an auditee to do in such a situation regarding documentation and so on and so forth. And it works, so don't be afraid.
Absolutely. And the last thing to say about the quiz questions, SQA is an American organization where we're global, but it is US based. So the questions are always going to be coming from the perspective of FDA unless otherwise stated. So by default, if it doesn't say a regulation, the default is FDA. So I believe in this, if it's not in this session, there is another session. So there is a question. There are questions that say in EPA, blah, 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 or under OECD, etc. Or if they're talking obviously about pesticide, then it would be EPA versus FDA. All right, so let's jump into our first one.
And one practical tip in addition, if you feel like you are getting stuck over a question, flag it, you can do that. There is a technical option how to do it and move forward. You may be able to answer 90% of the questions in no time. And then you go back and spend more time on those that you need more time to think about. Because if you get stuck, you might be missing a lot of those where you know the answer 100% correct, but because of time limit, you might not get to that place. That's just a strategy to work with the time effectively.
Absolutely, that's a great point, Camilla. There are a lot of questions, and you do have a large amount of time, but it's not that long. And if you hem and haw too long on one, it could throw your pace off. So, think back when you were in school, you go through the easy ones, pin it, and come back to the more difficult ones, because getting one wrong or not being able to answer one versus not being able to answer 20 is going to be a huge difference. All right, so the first question. The QA SOP for inspections state that QA will select one or more in-process phases of each study to inspect. Depending on the length of the study director tells the QA manager that the SOP should be revised because in-process inspections should only be performed if requested by the study director. What would be the most appropriate response be? Select one. A, the SOP will not be changed because QA is required to inspect each study at intervals adequate to assure the integrity of the study and maintain written records of such inspections. B, the SOP will be changed because the study director is the single point of control for studies. And if the preference is to have QA do in-process inspections only on request from the study director, that will become the new procedure. The SOP may be changed, but QA will have to check with test facility management first to see if management agrees with the request, as it would affect all studies in the facility. Or D, the SOP will not be changed because QA auditors need to interact with the technical staff so that when this data comes to QA for review, they understand how the data was collected. So,
and I suggest you put in the chat the answer that you consider correct. So either A or B or C or D. It's just one of these options. I see a lot of A's coming. Anyone thinks different than A?
And is anybody willing to either type in the chat or come on camera, or at least unmute yourselves and explain why you think A is the correct answer.
Should we call a name of a volunteer? Don't worry, I'm kidding.
Yes, we won't volunteer you.
Okay, someone says C, and here is the regulatory reference, 5835A. Someone
Okay.
knows the regulation by heart. That's impressive. My answer typically is, I don't know which paragraph, but I know where to find it.
Exactly. And by the way, that isn't typically a requirement that you quote off the point of the FDA or the EPA citations. You need to know the content. Don't stress if you don't know the numbers. Most people don't remember the numbers off the top of their head. Some people are very good with numbers. That is not something you will have to be required to remember in your responses on the quiz. All right, so let's go ahead and show the answer. So A was the correct answer. The SOP will not be changed because QA is required to inspect each study at intervals adequate to assure the integrity of the study and maintain written records of such inspections. So 21 CFR 38B3 is if you go to that for the correct answer, the quality assurance unit shall inspect each non-clinical laboratory study at intervals adequate to assure the integrity of the study and maintain written and properly signed records of each periodic inspection showing the date of the inspection, the study inspected, the phase or segment of the study inspected, the person performing the inspection, findings and problems, actions recommended and taken to resolve existing problems, and any scheduled date for reinspection. Any problems found during the course of an inspection which are likely to affect study integrity shall be brought to the attention of the study director and management immediately. All right.
QA is independent, so QA should not be driven by the wishes of the study director.
Yeah. Now, that does fly in the face a little bit of the latest OECD guidances that do recommend that QA should communicate with the study director to help assess what phases may be considered critical to a study. So the study director may be most knowledgeable in that. So it doesn't preclude that QA can't work with the study director to help evaluate what may be a particular critical step on a given study. So that is important, but again, it doesn't preclude under FDA GLPs, QA must inspect each study. All right, so great job, everyone.
Anita, you had some comments?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I saw someone who said C, which I don't want to pick on that, but I thought it was interesting because in real, that's how reality works, right? The C is the reality. But I guess that's a good point to always think. We're not really talking about real life experience, but what regulations really say. And then also, I personally used to have a problem reading all the questions carefully. So another thing would be what would be most appropriate. So that's the only reason why A would be the best answer versus C, because C is more real life. But A is the most appropriate answer because of the regulations. Just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, thank you, Anita. That's a great point, and it kind of highlights what you will see in the quiz. For the most part, there's maybe one, maximum two that you completely write off. The other ones are possible because test facility management has to approve the procedures, and that includes the SOP, the QA SOPs. So TFM does approve that. So if you look at it from that perspective, it is a potential, right? The TFM, may take suggestions and they may evaluate, yes, we do need to do that. But then it comes down to looking at each individual response, exactly as Anita said, and looking for the most correct answer.
Should also equip you in your real life discussions with the study directors and test facility management, when you might be either gently or less gently pushed towards a certain decision, but then you say, but we need to stay compliant. And in that case, take out not common sense, but take up the regulation and say, this is what we need to comply with. Otherwise, we are running into problems.
Excellent. All right, so let's go to the second one. So that was some good discussion, and thank you, Chris. And we do appreciate, sharing other possibilities, because, here's the question, here's the right answer, isn't necessarily going to elicit other discussion. So it is good to take a look at some of the other responses of why it wouldn't be the right one. All right, question 2. The master schedule sheet should be indexed by, select one. A, study initiation date, B, test article, C, sponsor, D, study number.
I see a lot of B's and this article 1D so far. Of course, you may have a header where you have more than one thing, but what is the minimum what should be there?
Yeah. All right, so we do have a good, we've got some B's, we've got some D's. All right, B's and D's. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look. So the correct answer is test article. So 21 CFR 5835B1, that's in 1987 for the correct answer. The quality assurance unit shall maintain a copy of a master schedule sheet of all non-clinical laboratory studies conducted at the testing facility, indexed by test article and containing the test system, nature of study, date study was initiated, current status of each study, identity of the sponsor, and name of the study director. All right, so it is, in terms of FDA, it is test article. Now under OECD, there isn't a specific indication of what it should be indexed by. And quite often, the regulators coming on site will ask, index it per study director or index it per whatever. So there isn't necessarily a default, but again, always go back to the regulations. And the default, unless specified otherwise, will typically be FDA or EPA when referring to pesticides. And FDA and EPA are not significantly different in terms of the core. So master schedule would be the same, and much of the requirements are similar. There are a few subtle differences, but nothing in this type of example, the default would be known to be US based. Right, but thank you. Anybody who went with option D, would anyone like to elaborate potentially why you put that? Is that something perhaps you do at your facility, which again isn't necessarily wrong, especially when you're hosting a sponsor. Often sponsors may want it indexed by a different manner.
Hi, Sherry.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm Jyoti. I'm basically from India. So India is mad adherent, as we all know, OECD principles of GLP we follow. So according to OECD, we do it as per the study number. So I thought maybe FDA also does the same. So that's why I put D.
Excellent, thank you. And that
But
highlights.
great to know that it's by test article.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a perfect example, always remembering that default is the FDA stance.
Yeah,
If there's a difference between FDA and OECD, unless it stipulates OECD in the question, the default will be FDA.
FDA, right.
Right.
Yeah, you may also have some local regulations that ask for something different. So you need to adhere to local regulations. And in case you work for a sponsor who is in the US, you need to align how this should be done and what you need to follow in terms of the FDA requirements because of the submission one day, maybe. And the other thing is you should explain what your local requirements are and why you need to comply with those. And perhaps it would be a kind of combination.
Well, in
That's
there is the mutual acceptance of data, which does grant acceptance across countries. So each country of residents of doing the work, they would typically make claim in their report what they're following. So I'm up in Canada, so we would be following OECD as well. So that's why I keep emphasizing FDA. And so what we would do, but our compliance statement would indicate that we are following OECD principles of GLP. And because of the mutual acceptance of data, it can be submitted to FDA, and FDA won't be looking at those. However, if we have a multi-site study, a phase, if it's being done in the US, they will be looking to make sure that US phase is following FDA regulations.
That's right. Thank you so much.
And thank you. Someone put in the reference to the FDA OECD comparison chart. It's a great tool for quick comparison. And it really is. It's a great, it highlights the subtle differences. Overall, there's not huge differences. Different terminology. There's some requirements under OECD principles of GLP that differ than FDA in terms of responsibility. It doesn't mean that FDA doesn't follow that, but under OECD principles, it's been defined as a designated person's responsibility. So under OECD, there has to be a designated archivist by test facility management, whereas under FDA, they just say an archivist needs to be assigned. There's no specific listing under management's responsibility. So there are subtle things, and I hopefully I didn't get that one wrong. I do have my little handy regs, which has OECD, FDA, and Part 11 as well. But yes, that's a great tool. So I do highly recommend taking a look at that. All right, so let's move on to the third question. The FDA is on site, so now it's very clear it's FDA, to conduct a general surveillance inspection and asked to see the reports that the QAU is supposed to generate for an ongoing study. What should be shown to the inspector? Select one. Phase inspection reports with the findings of QAU and responses from study director, PI, or study personnel. B, master schedule sheet and index of data that has been reviewed and its location. C, signed QA statement that goes in the final report with phase of inspection, date completed, and date reported to management and study director. Or D, proof of periodic report to management and study director and proof of phase inspections being conducted. All right, so we got some B's, we got some D's. B's and D's seem to have it. C, oh, now we have a C, great. All right, so hopefully you're all on the edge of your seat on this one because we do have a few potential options. So we will discuss what the correct answer is and potentially why the other ones might be correct, but not the most correct. All right, so the answer is proof of periodic report to management and study director and proof of phase inspections being conducted. So 21 CFR Part 5835B4, the quality assurance unit shall periodically submit to management and the study director written status reports on each study, noting any problems and the corrective actions taken. So, so that's what the quiz is looking for. Option A, phase inspection reports with the findings of QAU and responses. So the QA records are actually confidential. FDA cannot access them without a subpoena. So usually if you get to the point of subpoena, you've had a lot of missteps by that point. So, So usually that is not the case, and they know what they're allowed to see, so they're not typically going to ask for it. You may get an inspector who tries to see if you are privy of, or knowledgeable as to what they're allowed to access or not. B, the master schedule sheet and index. So yes, the master schedule is something that will be requested to be seen, but that's not evidence that the QAU is, see the reports that the QAU is supposed to generate, right? The master schedule is independent of the QA records. So the QA master schedule absolutely can be seen by the FDA regulators. That's actually one of the key documents they like to see, but that doesn't show evidence that the QA performed their audits as they're required to. C was a good option. C would be my really, really close. So the signed QAU statement that goes into the final report, because it identifies the phases inspection, the dates completed, and dates reported to management and study director. So that's great. However, that's the statement, right? So the D is actually proof that that QA statement that they're going to see in the final report that they're looking at is actually supported by records, right? They want to see the reports. They want to see evidence that these reports exist. There was a warning letter issued in 2022 regarding that there were, one of the citations was that there was no evidence to support dates that they put in a quality assurance statement. So that is something important. Yes, go ahead, Judy.
I just want to say something. The question says the QA is supposed to generate for an ongoing study. So that means that study is still undergoing, right? So in that scenario, the signed QA statement won't be there, right? Or
absolutely. Right? So that is a trick question. Well, a trick answer. So yes, most people could generate a draft. So yes, the fact that it says signed and it says ongoing, so that's another key. So good pickup. Again, that's another. Take your time reading your question and take your time truly reading the responses, because sometimes, so if your option C was like, wow, a QA statement that has everything to prove, but
I also thought about C first, then I thought, okay, no, it's ongoing study, so then I stepped back to D. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for catching that. So yes, that's just shows all the different potentials that are out there. I do see a hand up, so go ahead.
Yeah, Elizabeth also has a question.
Yeah, thank you. Do you hear me? I
yes.
think so. I like the D, and I've been in a situation that I made a remark that they didn't do enough reviews. So we have the word periodic. It's a little bit large, isn't it? Does it mean each month or each once a year, or is there a discussion, or is it open to discussion when they inspect?
It would be the site, obviously test facility management would be responsible to be having those requirements in their SOPs. The expectation, of course, is as we saw with the previous answer, in that they had indicated that if sorry, one of our previous responses had highlighted that if there's any where is it? Any problems found during the course of inspection which are likely to affect study integrity shall be brought to the attention of the study director management immediately. So periodic inspection, periodic submissions to management and study director are basically the expectation, while not stipulated in black and white in the regulations, are that you're going to report them. Once you do an audit, you're going to report. There is no defined timeline, but you're probably going to be hard pressed to justify why you would be reporting an inspection, especially a inspection of a phase or the protocol, waiting a month or 2 months to report that. So typically what most or my experience based on discussions and experiences, most people will be reporting those protocol and phase inspections that they do promptly. And so if you come and you go into, for example, the animal room and see the wrong test material being administered, you immediately contact the study director. That's there's no waiting a day or two. If you go in and see dosing and everything looked good, the tech forgot to sign something, you pointed it out, they signed it. If you send that to the study director the next day or the day after, it's not critical, right? You pointed out the issue, it was corrected, it was not critical. So the QA folks hopefully have experience to know what level is acceptable and what type of findings we need to let the study director know now versus, this can wait a day or two.
And the other thing to consider is how many studies are done in your facility. That's one thing. What is the volume of the work? And what are the critical parts of each study? Maybe for one of them, there is really nothing very critical. For another, that could be a couple of things. So you don't have a hard rule like quarterly or semi-annually, something like that. It's really, I would say, pretty much facility specific, based on what you do and based on on your historical records, what would be the likely most appropriate time. But remember also, it's something flexible. It can change. So what was true 3 years ago may not be true this year and may not apply next year. So revisiting this and not taking some kind of rigid frequency, that would be the best thing to do, because the work changes, the type of studies may be changing. So always take it as a first consideration. What would be then the implication for this reporting requirement?
Okay, so this means that for an inspector, it's nice to see a periodically review without findings. It's not only when there would be a deviation or an amendment that it should be linked to an inspection or inspection, right?
Correct. So if you conduct, again, this is under FDA because it is the FDA. If each study is required to be inspected, so you may do an inspection and you didn't have any findings. So again, it's not critical to get it out the door that same day or the next day. But again, if it's on a specific study, you don't want to sit on that for, 3 months. Or a specific study. And then a lot of while the FDA doesn't specifically say you can or can't, under the OECD principles of GLP, there are process-based inspections, right? So for those less critical activities, you may be doing them on a quarterly basis and sending that as a periodic summary of these are the phase inspections we did this quarter, and these are the reports for them. So as long as you have a procedure in place, you can defend that. And most importantly, if there are any problems or critical actions, that those are critical citations, that those are communicated promptly. That's the key. So make sure your process is defendable based on how your site functions, but there should be a process to highlight if something's important, you can't sit on it for a month or 3 months, or because that's when your usual reporting time frame is.
Yeah, so ideally you could already schedule your inspections before the start or at the start of the study. You don't need to wait that everything goes wrong.
Correct.
Great.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that question. All right, so we will move on. We are getting close to the end of the session, and we have 2 more great questions. So we will go ahead. Question 4, protocol states that media will be collected and stored in 0.75 ml cryovials for later cytokine analysis. On the day of collection, the biologist used 2 ml cryovials to store the media. The QA auditor noted the discrepancy during a routine in-phase inspection and included it as a finding in an audit report. How should the discrepancy be handled? Select 1. The study director can respond to the audit finding indicating that the cryovial size did not have an impact on the study, so no additional documentation is required. A protocol amendment should be created to modify the cryovial size to 2.0 ml. A note to file can be created by the study director to authorize the cryovial substitution and indicate that there was no impact. A deviation report should be completed indicating that an incorrect vial size was used. This deviation should be noted in the report.
And we have 100% Ds coming so far.
All right, so I won't wait on that one. So absolutely. So D, a deviation report should be completed indicating that an incorrect vial size was used and the deviation should be noted in the report. So this one actually refers to OECD revised guidance for the conduct of laboratory inspections and study audits. Completion of inspection of study audits, page 2023 for the correct answer. Now, the source of some of the responses, I did try and tune in as many as possible, but the way the regulations are listed, they don't necessarily explicitly write out much of the expectations. But if the protocol said one thing and the protocol was not followed, then that's a deviation. Hopefully the fact that everyone said D, you all know that that's a protocol deviation, and industry standard is protocol deviations typically get reported. So that's why we say should be noted in the report. Are there any questions on that, or does anybody see anything potentially different? B, a protocol amendment should be created to modify the cryovial. So that is a good backup. Obviously, for this instance, you can't amend after the fact, but if the 2 ml is in real life, you shouldn't be, you can't after the fact. You will get cited, the agency, if they see that you issued an amendment to, you have an SOP for late amendments. All right, I'd love to hear more about that. The protocol amendment is a proactive change. So you can certainly issue an amendment if perhaps 2 ml is what we typically have in the lab. So you can amend for subsequent sampling occasions, but at the time that the event occurred, the protocol stated 0.75, 2.0 was used. That would be very challenging to argue that it wasn't a deviation.
I agree with Chris. I have seen some companies push that. It's like, well, we intended to have that. It's just a typo. And but again, back to whenever you respond to these, don't go based on real life. Go based on what regulations say. And that's probably one of the hardest thing. Don't think about what your company is doing. Think about what regulations, FDA regulations say. That's going to be the hardest one.
And in that case, in this case, the clear difference between an amendment and a deviation is that the activity has already happened. So it has to be a deviation. It cannot be an amendment. And as far as, study director's point of view, there is always an impact which needs to be, reported along with the deviation, that what the impact on the study integrity has that deviation. So in this case, there is no impact on the integrity. So it can be very well defended. It's just a deviation to be reported. That's it. Nothing much.
Now, if the argument of the plan was all along was to use 2.0, unless you have supporting documentation that perhaps say the study director signed the instructions to say 2.0, then your SOP may warrant, oh yes, they actually did follow the signed instructions from the study director, and they can potentially issue an amendment to say this was a typographical error. The instructions were provided based on the the validation method, and the amendment was inadvertently not done prior to the activity, but the instructions, signed instructions. So you would need, there is potential, but again, when you're going with the quiz, go with the most conservative approach. All right. So if the plan all along was to use 2.0, my question would be, what evidence do you have that was the plan, right? If the only signed instructions was the protocol saying 0.75, and then the tech used 2, even if that was the plan, you can verbalize everything you want, everything has to be in writing. There was a comment concerning perhaps C. There is a note to file. So again, it depends on what your facility uses notes to file for. I can say that I've heard many conversations about notes to file. And if your term for deviation is a note to file, then I would say that that's fine, but it is a deviation, right? Note to file in terms of elaborating, again, that would depend. And this case, in this specific example, the written instructions were 0.75, that was in the protocol. 2.0 was followed unless you have something that's supporting. So if there was a note to file, again, written in advance, differing, then you may have a different argument. But you can elaborate further on the situation as you are reading it in the quiz question. Exactly. Documentation is needed for study reconstruction even when deviations occur. And one of the most important things, I'm not trying to preach here, but deviations are not this horrible negative thing. I know sometimes a lot operationally and scientifically, people don't want deviations. The reality is, especially, animal-based studies, even lab-based work, things won't always go according to plan. Life does not go according to plan. Deviations are not a bad thing. Deviations are only a bad thing if you don't address them properly, they're not closed out properly, or you try and hide them. Yeah, we didn't follow the protocol. Exactly. Great. All right, we're at the final one. Question 5, a quality auditor from a potential sponsor has come to your facility to assess the facility's GLP compliance program. The auditor, Mr. Smith, makes several verbal observations while on site based on what he has recently read in a new guidance document related to the type of work his company would place at your facility. Mr. Smith indicates that those processes should be instituted at your facility to meet the new expectations of the agency. How should the auditor respond? Select 1. Tell Mr. Smith that the guidance document will need to be reviewed by appropriate staff and management to determine if they feel a change in current procedure is warranted at this time based on recommendations of the new guidance. Tell Mr. Smith that you agree any new guidance should be incorporated into your facility's procedures as soon as possible, and that will be done. C, tell Mr. Smith that the facility's current procedures meet the regulatory standards in place and the facility is not interested in changing anything just because the new guidance has been released. And D, tell test facility management that the facility must change the current procedures to comply with the new guidance because the potential sponsor just mentioned that they expect their contractors to comply with the guidance document. All right, so I am seeing mostly, the only response I am seeing is A, tell Mr. Smith that the guidance document will need to be reviewed by appropriate staff and management to determine if they feel a change in current procedure is warranted at this time based on the recommendations of the new guidance. So that is the correct answer. So again, there's no direct aspect of the GLPs that define that, but as I saw someone, A Wagers noted, you should not be cited against a guidance document from a regulatory agency. I would say, but under FDA, Chrissy Cochran has said on many occasions that the FDA GLP inspectors should not be citing you to new guidance. If you speak to people in industry, you will hear that quite often it does happen that you are cited. So while they say it doesn't happen, it does happen. But typically they are, unless the guidance has been around for quite some time, they do understand that companies, as long as they're aware of it and making assessments to determine if the proposed changes or the new guidance are, perhaps their current process already meets those requirements, or they will typically do a gap analysis and then assess where are gaps, are they critical gaps, how do we address it, etc. It does take time to do that. We can't, it's not a light switch like, a document comes out and everyone just changes everything. Under OECD, however, there are guidances. So we have our principles of GLP, and then we have guidance documents already up to 24. So there's guidance, there's consensus documents, and all of those additional extensions of the principles, you can be cited to. So that is a little subtle difference again from FDA. No, now that's talking, those additional advisory documents, guidance, etc., are concerning the GLP principles and not specifically, method validations and stuff like that. Though some topics do cover additional topics. Typically the agency, when they are citing it, is that they explain that current guidance is what their current thinking is, right? So that becomes less of a GLP thing and more of a scientific thing. So at that point, your scientific folks come rolling in and discuss with the inspector to say, yes, we are evaluating it, or we've done the evaluation and there's 2 minor things that we don't feel are necessary to incorporate with X reason Y, etc. So there's a lot of different things technically from the GLP standpoint. They should not be putting in a citation, but sometimes it does happen. So never say never. And as we all know, rules sometimes are meant to be a little bit bended. We won't say broken, but sometimes it is bent. So so that's just to let you know.
I do want to mention real quick on what we talked about, that you're not supposed to get cited for guidance, not following guidances. But something that Chrissy Cochran also said is that if your protocol says we are following that guidance, then that's a protocol requirement. So you do need to be mindful of your references. So that could be the reason some of those companies got cited, because the protocol says, hey, we're following this guidance. So just something real quick to point about that.
Absolutely. And that is something, again, Chrissy has indicated, though, if you are hosting an FDA inspection and you are being given a hard time about a guidance, and Anita's 120% plus correct. If you say you're following that guidance in your protocol, then you need to be following that guidance in your protocol. So generally, you don't want to make claim that we're following this guidance. Or you can say your study design was modeled after it, but not saying that you're following. There's very, very specific wording, right? Your protocol is your legal document for that study, right? So they're looking at it. So if your protocol, even in the footnote, says, study design based on these regulations or this guidance, then you could get tripped up. All right. I don't know if we ran a little bit late. I don't know if anybody has any additional questions or anything. Hopefully you found this session interesting and helpful. Again, we did start off with sort of the easier one. This is more in terms of QA sort of day-to-day and what they're responsible for. The other sessions will be offering, if I can go back to slide 2, the other sessions will be a little bit more meatier. So we've got the next session next Tuesday is the compliance assessment, monitoring and what to monitor. a week after compliance assessment, inspecting and what to inspect, compliance assessment, auditing and what to audit, applied expertise, evaluating what to evaluate, and applied expertise, advising and what to advise. So with that, thank you all so much for attending. Thank you for your patience as we work through working through our very first session. So thank you all so much for everyone who joined, for all who had questions. Anita, thank you so much for getting thrown in there a little bit. And thanks all who asked questions, shared information. This is exactly what we're looking for, right? Discussions to learn how to think the most compliant way for your exam.